has some quite very astonishing news to tell about, having come up as of yesterday, particularly concerning Condemned, that he shall very probably be moving out from the place within the next 2 months or so, permanently. The reason for his moving out right now, I'm not very certain of it, and I will try to learn of it essentially enough eventually. However, I should then have the place to myself singularly, essentially permanently afterward. It was very strange and peculiar a revelation, though at last a somewhat universal reward. I sense it should then become. Condemned is looking for another property, apparently, right now at this point, from what his mother had told me, though his moving out from the place should occur, from what he himself had told me, within the next 2 months at most. So peculiar and revelatory this situation change is for me. To know what this should be like for me, I would then be able to purchase not even an electronic headphone piano, but a wooden upright piano, and to play it at the place essentially any time that I would want to or wish to do that. I would then be able to record many vocal discourses whenever I'd wish. I would be able to record many book recitations, and whatever I'd wish to do this to as well. Though I'd be alone here every day and every night, week after week, month after month, year after year. That is, were the changes to the rental agreement to then still be affordable to me, that I wouldn't of necessity otherwise need to move out then after to a different place. I imagine that over time the night and the darkness here would very probably become increasingly inconceivably terrifying to me, as it would have become to me as such during even simply a month to myself at the place. Though I imagine that I would browse around online for other personals for a friendship or two by then far more often, that the place to myself would by then have become my own house, and by my own rules and restrictions would these such apply to the place, that a friend and I would be able to visit the place and lounge around the place whenever we would wish to, and for as long as we would wish to as well. Altogether, essentially by March of this year, something predominantly significant and radically life-altering is indeed necessarily and with complete certainty going to happen and going to occur to me. And I think that with the same complete certainty that this radical life alteration of mine is clearly going to be something of an essentially universal reward, finally and at last. After my own experience of so much prolonged coldness, emptiness, and austerity of the past few months, I will miss it, truthfully, the coldness, the emptiness, the cleanliness, and the austerity. I did imagine yesterday that this particular experience will soon enough have then become a very strong and profound memory of my own, that I will forever afterward have then striven to strongly, perfectly imitate that peculiar nature back into my life, as it otherwise was going to have since become. The coldness and such, and the austerity, was altogether truly and absolutely universal affirmative influence on me over time, whether particularly or individually so or not, that I thought I was otherwise suffering or in severe pain from it. Ultimately, I was not wrongly suffering or in severe pain from it. It was in truth a very hot, strong, and powerful fire indeed, though it was as such completely evident as severe preparation for the essentially universal reward that was soon going to have then become afterward. The universal reward, of course, was clear to have been, at least for the time being, the entire property to myself permanently, now that I am ready enough and prepared enough to guard it, to protect it, to experience the now true purgatory altogether alone. The becoming paradise is now much closer, sooner, and nearer at hand. I will write more regarding this upcoming major life change of mine. January 20, 2013. 1/22/2013. Another appendage in relativity to the essential organon of each of the specific terms deduced within one of the enumerated categories, that is, a part of one of the enumerated categories written below. Each of the specific terms are reciprocable of one metaphysical attribution, that of which this metaphysical attribution is the designation of the composed subject from time to time. Though, however, the specific metaphysical attribution is predicable to the subject within one division of time, and the specific metaphysical attribution is predicable to the subject a part of only one of the enumerated termed categories written below, that is, predicable of only one, or of only two, or such and such, and of which the particular specific metaphysical attribution is predicable to the subject's inveterate and singularly designated formative or representative composed substantiation. This particular specific metaphysical attribution, a part of only one of the enumerated termed categories, of which it is predicable to the subject within one division of time. Each of the specific terms a part of one of the enumerated categories, and each of the enumerated categories altogether are predicable in relativity to the generation category, and altogether are predicable in relativity to the physique category, and altogether are predicable in relativity to the intellect category, and altogether are predicable in relativity to the identity category. There are 4 imparted terms that are predicable to each one of the enumerated termed categories. There are 8 enumerated termed categories that are predicable to each one of the 4 enumerated termed categories just above mentioned, that is, of the generation category, of the physique category, of the intellect category, and of the identity category. 4, 8 times, and then 32. 32 4 times, therefore 128. 128, the complete enumerated attribution aforementioned in a part of the particular specific treatise of mine, the essential organon. The 4 imparted termed category that is predicable to the generation category of the composed subject may substantiate in divisional relativity to the 4 imparted termed category that is predicable to the physique category of the composed subject, and the 4 imparted termed category that is predicable to the physique category of the composed subject may substantiate in divisional relativity to the 4 imparted termed category that is predicable to the intellect category of the composed subject, and the 4 imparted termed category that is predicable to the intellect category of the composed subject may substantiate in divisional relativity to the 4 imparted termed category that is predicable to the identity category of the composed subject. To demonstrate this here very generally, 1 is predicable to the generation category of the composed subject, 2 to the physique category of the composed subject, 3 to the intellect category of the composed subject, and 4 to the identity category of the composed subject, although 1 that is predicable to the generation category of the composed subject is inveterate and singularly designated, 2 that is predicable to the physique category of the composed subject is inveterate and singularly designated, 3 that is predicable to the intellect category of the composed subject is inveterate and singularly designated, 4 that is predicable to the identity category of the composed subject is inveterate and singularly designated. If the generation category is predicable to human, then either 1 or 2 is predicable to the generation category. If the generation category is predicable to animal, then either 3 or 4 is predicable to the generation category. If the generation category is predicable to plants, then either 5 or 6 is predicable to the generation category. If the generation category is predicable to mineral, then either 7 or 8 is predicable to the generation category. If the physique category is predicable to male, then either 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 is predicable to the physique category. If the physique category is predicable to female, then either 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 is predicable to the physique category. The intellect category that is predicable to male human, male animal, male plant, male mineral, female mineral, either 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 is predicable to the intellect category. The identity category that is predicable to male human, male animal, male plant, male mineral, female mineral, either 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 is predicable to the identity category. 1. Antecedent formal cause animus archetype. Precedent formal cause animus archetype. Subsequent formal cause animus archetype. Consequent formal cause animus archetype. 2. Antecedent formal cause animus imitative representation. Precedent formal cause animus imitative representation. Subsequent formal cause animus imitative representation. Consequent formal cause animus imitative representation. 3. Antecedent material cause persona archetype. Precedent material cause persona archetype. Subsequent material cause persona archetype. Consequent material cause persona archetype. 4. Antecedent material cause persona imitative representation. Precedent material cause persona imitative representation. Subsequent material cause persona imitative representation. Consequent material cause persona imitative representation. 5. Antecedent efficient cause anima archetype. Precedent efficient cause anima archetype. Subsequent efficient cause anima archetype. Consequent efficient cause anima archetype. 6. Antecedent efficient cause anima imitative representation. Precedent efficient cause anima imitative representation. Subsequent efficient cause anima imitative representation. Consequent efficient cause anima imitative representation. 7. Antecedent final cause shadow archetype. Precedent final cause shadow archetype. Subsequent final cause shadow archetype. Consequent final cause shadow archetype. 8. Antecedent final cause shadow imitative representation. Precedent final cause shadow imitative representation. Subsequent final cause shadow imitative representation. Consequent final cause shadow imitative representation. January 22, 2013. In relativity to the formal organon. 2. 1. 2013. Groundwork in relativity to the formal organon. This writing is going to be simply a very incomplete working note for the time being, very insufficient, and with absolute and complete certainty to the best of my capability. The topic, the work, and the subject matter are going to be exercised upon and worked out more completely and sufficiently within some time sooner or later to come. Foremost primarily so were any of the predicable attributes, the part of the formal organon, to have then been falsely ascribed or wrongly placed within the predicable attribute termed enumerations. There are 128 attributes predicable to the formal organon, and there are 8 material categories predicable to the formal organon. That is, there's of 1 substantival category, and there's of 7 adjectival categories. There is a part of the substantival category, 1 category itself predicable of substance. The category itself of substance is predicable of 64 foremost primary attributes. It is predicable of 16 as such human attributes, 16 as such animal attributes, 16 as such plant attributes, 16 as such mineral attributes. Each of the 4 imparted termed categories are predicable of the substance category, that of which this category in and of itself is predicable of the substantival category. That the substance category is predicable of 4 categories, each a part of themselves, and the 4 categories, each a part of themselves, are predicable of 4 foremost primary attributes. Thus 4 times, then 16, 16, 4 times, then 64. The most immediate of each of the termed enumerations do include up to 2 or 3 or 4 termed attributions in addition to merely 1 attribution alone at times, though up to 4 termed attributions is at least for the time being going to have been the foremost limitation. There is predicable of the adjectival categories, the 7 categories themselves, through the means of this subsequent descent of quality, quantity, relativity, activity, passivity, positivity, durability. The 7 categories themselves are predicable of 63 foremost primary attributes. That is, each of the 7 categories themselves are predicable of 9 foremost primary attributes peculiar to each of their own, the 7 adjectival categories. The first foremost primary terms predicable to each of the 7 adjectival categories themselves are deduced as essentially their own distinct categories in and of themselves, that with each of the subsequent 8 terms that are predicable to each of the 7 adjectival categories themselves are as deduced essentially simultaneously as predicable of both the foremost primary term predicable to the adjectival category itself, then called into question, as well as predicable to the adjectival category itself, then called into question. Thus 7, 9 times, then 63. The 1 foremost primary final attribute predicable to the formal organon is reserved in accordance to the formal material principle itself, that is not predicable to the invariable attribution of the termed enumeration, that of which is otherwise predicable to the transcendental category, is reserved the omnipresent, omnibenevolent, omnipotent, omniscient attribution in and of itself, that is a part of the formal organon. It in and of itself is manifest and substantiated through the means of the subsequent descent thus enumerated. The 4 imparted termed attribution is written and mentioned through the means of that above written and mentioned subsequent ascent from omnipresent through to omniscient. The foremost primary attribution predicable to the transcendental category itself is to be written and mentioned through the means of the subsequent descent from omniscience through to omnipresent, that is, the omniscient term predicable to the formal cause, the omnipotent term predicable to the material cause, the omnibenevolent term predicable to the efficient cause, the omnipresent term predicable to the final cause. Ultimately, thus 163 added, then 64. 64, the foremost primary attributes predicable to the 7 adjectival categories. 64, the foremost primary terms predicable to the 1 substantival category added, then therefore 128. 128, the complete enumerated termed attribution, a part of the hereafter termed particular specific treatise of mind, the formal organon. Though, again, this must be written and mentioned, that is, this writing is going to be simply a very incomplete working note for the time being, very insufficient with absolute and complete certainty to the best of my capability. The topic, the work, and the subject matter are going to be exercised upon and worked out more completely and sufficiently within some time sooner or later to come. In relativity to the substantival category, that is, in relativity to the substance category, each of the 4 imparted termed enumerations that are predicable to each of the 4 substance categories themselves, that is, each of the 4 imparted termed enumerations that are predicable to each of the 4 human, the 4 animal, the 4 plant, the 4 mineral categories themselves, succeed in the foremost primary principal order, from the formal cause to the material cause, to the efficient cause, to the final cause, such as that attribute 1 is predicable to the formal cause, attribute 2 is predicable to the material cause, attribute 3 is predicable to the efficient cause, attribute 4 is predicable to the final cause, then the attributes from 5 through to 8 as such are each predicable to the above mentioned foremost primary principal order. For the attributes from 1 through to 4 are predicable to their own particular specific category below written and mentioned, and the attributes from 5 through to 8 are predicable to their own particular specific category below written and mentioned as well, so on and so forth, though so far as the foremost primary principal order applies only in relativity to the substantival category, that is, in relativity to the substance category. For the foremost primary principal order in relativity to the 7 adjectival categories does apply divergently from the substantival category foremost primary principal order, that is, in relativity to the 7 adjectival categories. The formal cause applies to the first foremost primary term predicable to each of the 7 adjectival categories. Then, concerning the remainder of each of the categories themselves, the following 8 terms predicable to the adjectival category then called into question succeeds in the above written and mentioned foremost primary principal order, that is, from the formal cause to the material cause to the efficient cause to the final cause, such that, for example, attribute 65, that is, the first attribute predicable to the quality category, that is predicable to the formal cause, and then attribute 66, the second attribute predicable to the quality category is predicable to the formal cause, then attribute 67, the third attribute is predicable to the material cause, attribute 68, the fourth attribute is predicable to the efficient cause, attribute 69, the fifth attribute is to the final cause, 70, the sixth attribute is to the formal cause, 71, the seventh attribute is to the material cause, 72, the eighth attribute is to the efficient cause, and 73, the ninth attribute is to the final cause. The particular specific principal order above written and mentioned applies in relativity to each of the 7 adjectival categories themselves. X, or ain, or unknown, or infinite, or eternal, or invariable. Transcendental category. X, or ain, or unknown, or infinite, or eternal, or invariable. Omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omnipresent. 1. Substantival category. 1. Substance. Human. White. 1 Greek, Latin, Slav, Teuton. 2 Semite. 3 Arab. 4 Hindu Aryan. Yellow. 5 Mongoloid. 6 Chinese Japanese. 7 Burmese, Vietnamese, Thai. 8 Malaysian, Indonesian, New Guinean, Polynesian, Oceanic Islander. Black. 9 Congolese. 10 Kemetic, Libyan. 11 Bantu, Guinean, Nigerian. 12 Zulu, Zambian, Namibian. Namibian. Brown. 13 Aleut, Inuit, Yupik. 14 Incan, Aztecan. 15 Blackfoot, Navajo, Cherokee. 16 Amazonian. Animal. Avian. 17 Hawk, Eagle. 18 Condor, Vulture. 19 Robin, Sparrow, Lark. 20 Crow, Raven, Fowl. Beast. 21 Goat, Ram. 22 Lion, Tiger. 23 Elephant, Rhino, Hippo. 24 Bull, Swine. Aquarian. 25 Ray, Octopus, Squid. 26 Shark, Marlin, Swordfish. 27 Whale, Seal, Porpoise. 28 Tortoise, Crab, Crayfish, Krill. Insect. 29 Arachnid. 30 Bee, Ant. 31 Dragonfly, Ladybug, Beetle. 32 Aphid, Grub, Parasite, Cellulite. Plant. Tree. 33 Pine, Fir. 34 Palm. 35 Oak, Elm, Hickory. 36 Beech, Willow, Yew, Bush. 37 More, Mattrel, Macus. 38 Cactus, Chaparral. 39 Juniper, Sage, Rose, Lavender. 40 Grass, Moss, Algae, Bracken. Leaf. 41 Root. 42 Stem, Sheath, Blade. 43 Seed, Bud, Blossom. 44 Wheat, Grain, Vegetable, Fruit. Twig. 45 Branch. 46 Bark. 47 Pit. 48 Spur. Mineral. Gem. 49 Diamond. 50 Ruby. 51 Sapphire. 52 Amethyst, Emerald. Metal. 53 Gold. 54 Iron. 55 Silver. 56 Bronze. Stone. 57 Salt. 58 Igneous. 59 Sediment. 60 Metamorphosis. Ground. 61 Ash, Pollen. 62 Sand. 63 Dirt. 64 Soil. Rather, instead, 63 Soil. 64 Dirt. Final. To 7 adjectival categories. 2 Quality. 65 Geometry. 66 Point. 67 Line. 68 Angle. 69 Square. 70 Diameter. 71 Length. 72 Width. 73 Measurement. 3 Quantity. 74 Arithmetic. 75 Sum. 76 Product. 77 Difference. 78 Quotient. 79 addition, 80 multiplication, 81 subtraction, 82 division, 4 relativity, 83 formal cause spatiality, 84 generation, 85 order, 86 speciation, 87 attribution, 88 father, uncle, 89 son, brother, 90 mother, aunt, 91 daughter, sister, 5 activity, 92 material causation, 93 universal affirmativeness, 94 affirmative sensibility, 95 affirmative irritability, 96 affirmative reproductivity, 97 negative reproductivity, 98 negative irritability, 99 negative sensibility, 100 universal negativeness, 6 passivity, 101 efficient cause temporality, 102 whiteness consciousness, 103 yellowness cheerfulness, 104 blackness fearfulness, 105 brownness sleepfulness, 106 blueness tearfulness, 107 redness irefulness, 108 orangeness essential cheerfulness, 109 greenness essential irefulness, 7 positivity, 110 primary final cause resolution, 111 north, 112 east, 113 west, 114 south, 115 northwest, 116 northeast, 117 southwest, 118 southeast, 8 durability, 119 ultimate final cause resolution, 120 springtime, 121 summertime, 122 autumn time, 123 winter time, 124 morning, 125 afternoon, 126 evening, 127 night, 128 omnipresent, omnibenevolent, omnipotent, omniscient. February 1, 2013. To 17/2013. Snow. As of lately, I did imagine my own self to be quite identifiably predicable to the ivory or marble sculptured statue. This is rather very peculiar and quite a fearful thought of my own, that I'm ultimately foremost primarily frozen, solid, fixated, determinate in my own knowledge and its understanding until the very end. And I'm dry and airy at the same time, and extremely sharp and fiery in my activity, its very own material causation. Altogether, this as such is a quite fearful thought of my own. I can only imagine for the time being just how eternal and everlasting the true, ignited, scorching flames are going to be to me during then and the hereafter. Then I must train myself to love the very flames, otherwise the pain of the eternal hellfire will be unfortunately forever unbearable, though there are clearly going to be other unspeakable and humanly inconceivable punishments of me that otherwise are absolutely and completely impossible to identify with any pleasure or desirable affirmativeness at all whatsoever. I'm absolutely truly alpha male, and I do of course essentially know how to approach another individual, particularly so were it a desirable and beautiful woman, and how to substantiate an appropriate enough conversation with her, especially so how to move strongly about her, and how to act likewise appropriately around her. The contemplation of mind of the attributes predicable to the term absolutely truly alpha male does clearly establish a much stronger affirmativeness, that of which it is attributable to the certainty and confidence of the foremost primary animus archetypal identity of mine. January 24, 2013. As of lately, when I do get to receive and read a message from her, this is strange and a very intimate secret to share this, but during each and every time that I do get to receive and read a message from her, as of lately, I then imagine this peculiar dream sequence derived from almost beyond my will, set up and established this dream sequence between her and I in this mysterious faraway house. We ourselves are together in the bedroom. I am on one side of the bed, and she is on the other, and she is raised up a little more than me. I'm not so sure how this itself works truly. And then the message is being spoken to me by her, and this is particularly so the most intimate detail during whenever the characteristic peculiar series of dots in her message. This in the dream sequence will designate the pausing of her voice, and then her reaching over to me, giving me a loving kiss, and the length of the series of dots will designate the duration and the magnitude of the kiss. And then the end of the message comes, then the dream sequence itself comes to an end, and that is with her to end vanishing and disappearing up into the wind, and then with me in the room all alone, then in tears praying for her to come back, and not at all knowing of her own whereabouts or of her own activities until she returns again to me with her next subsequent message. This secret of mine is very intimate and private to me to share. I know this, of course, and she knows how strongly my love is, and my respect is, and so on and so forth, altogether indefinitely for her, that I inveterately have herself embedded within what scarcity remains in my own heart by this point in my time. January 24, 2013. Essentially, there is within me severely strong, extremely profound, developed dichotomy predicable to my own formative identity, one that of which it is far too common and far too condemnable is the substantial logic of my own, the principle and principle here, there, and here, there, emptiness, emptiness, and emptiness. That in itself it is such insanity, though then the right brain hemisphere of my own, again the dichotomy here, the right brain hemisphere is indeed strongly enough developed, it is indeed antecedent archetypal, still it is as such by this point in my own lifetime, and then she would then effortlessly and immediately, initially, calmly and quietly soften the otherwise extremely dry substantial logic of my own, the otherwise severely incessant principle after principle after principle of my own, otherwise truly femininity denied identity, manifest more of this ever the more mystical and metaphysical femininity affirmative side of my own formative carable spectrum, then more of this right brain hemisphere that is legitimately and authentically brought about into the manifestation of mine, and this, of course, with consequently eternal and everlasting gratitude and adoration and so forth ever the more for me under her. I will never surrender to the denial of femininity in its complete and foremost totality. I think that my own singular saving grace from this otherwise horrifically terrifying, ultimately complete and total anti-sexual determinable volition of my own is up to the duty and responsibility of my own, of course, to save myself from that otherwise treacherous, condemnable hell-fire, though the duty and responsibility of my own as such predicates to my singular saving grace, that of which it is ultimately foremost primarily the listening to and the mystical and metaphysical understanding of this so very rare, soundful, agreeable, sane, austere, and so forth, quiet, soft-spoken, and grand character, intellect, and identity of her own. Of course, though such excitement it is, again, she knows this, though that condemned is going to have been moved away permanently, this within the next 2 months at the most. And after his move, no waiting unpleasantly prolonged for the quiet again place to myself. Such freedom this in itself would be, and at last recovery, altogether, singularly, solely, alone. Expenditures of the new monthly rental agreement are going to be, of course, considered, then whether to continue the place to myself, or if not, then to move, in this always strictly determined to dwell again at the mountains, this until the very end. This is to be my Wagnerian, Neuschwanstein, Bayern, mountainous coniferous, pine-forest invocation, always, forever. Sunniness, cheerfulness, joyfulness, things are looking up, light for yourself, Odin. These things, indeed, are looking up, light for me. Now, such it is strongly so desires to manifest, to bring about those right brain hemisphere, femininity affirmative, always mystical and metaphysical qualities or properties or categories within me, the soul and the heart of which I do still have, and salvageable and recoverable ever the more it is even so within this lifetime of mine of my own. The new photograph of mine, the new avatar of me on the account, it is clearly prequel to the very sunniness, cheerfulness, joyfulness, and so forth, that of which I had experienced later all throughout the remainder of the day to day. Love and affectionateness, so very much eternal and everlasting, now immortal, now hail and thunder. January 24, 2013. To answer her question concerning the quotes of mine, she had mentioned in her message to me, in truth, my own terms composed within the particular quotes, or the original phrase itself, were actually quite general and quite accidental, not sufficient nor complete enough. Rather, essentially, briefly here, and I know this with absolute complete certainty, I'm not attracted sexually to the male sex at all whatsoever, neither the male character nor the male intellect. Rather, instead, again with the same degree of certainty above mentioned, I know that I'm always strongly, fiercely, and passionately attracted to the female sex. This is to the female character and the female intellect, as well, although this is predicable to the female individual that I feel attracted to, and I attracted to her ever the more strongly were the female individual herself to predicate her character and intellect ever the more strongly to the material cause, or more rarely to the formal cause, male conceptual principles, and if such so, then naturally my own attractability to such her, the woman, becomes fiercely and passionately affectionate, and compatible and faithfully adjustable to her own self. That essentially, that physically, always the very strong attraction to the female category, the physique category is ordered more foremost primary above than the character in the intellect category. Therefore, the sexual appetition, the sexual fire, always practical to me in the female sex physique. Then metaphysically, always contemplative adoration and admiration of the attractive female individual, where the female herself to predicate metaphysically to essentially the material cause, or to even the formal cause, male principles and conceptions. For in my own generative family, clearly I had found a subconscious or concealed sexual attractability predicable to the mother archetype, and to this particular foremost primary archetype of mine alone, the anima archetype. Then the more or less conscious and revealed emulation or imitation, always so as such particles of the father archetype of mine, the animus archetype. Clearly so, this is itself predicable to the intellectual category, or to the metaphysical attribution of it as such. Never so is this predicable to the physique category of the father archetype of mine. The two other Kopecky, Walker, Nair brothers below me, likewise the one Walker Nair sister below these two other Nair Kopecky Walker Nair siblings of mine as well, though again no significant or even insignificant subconscious or concealed sexual attractability predicable to neither of them as well. Therefore, the inveterate sexual attraction of mine to the female physique is in emulation, generative reminiscence of the mother archetype, the anima. It might inveterate, not sexual, though moral and intellectual attractability to the male material cause, or to the male formal cause, conceptual principles. These, as such, always predicable to my own foremost primary significance and identifiable to me, father archetype. Essentially, as perhaps this Jungian, psychologically considering, ultimately I did arouse to Jort's body, and I did arouse to my moral and intellectual formal cause, conceptual principles. Therefore, these two together, the attractability of mind predicable to the female physique, and the identification of mind predicable to the male metaphysique. That is, the former, the anima archetype of mine, and the anima archetype of mine, and the latter, the animus archetype of mine. Then ultimately, truly to mention this to you here, that I myself did not like or desire or affirm the metaphysical, discernible, intellectual attribution predicable to my own Walker Nair mother archetype, essentially and ultimately so, not very much at all whatsoever. Therefore, the identification of the metaphysical metaphysical appetition of mind predicable to the attractable female individual to me, that of the displacement of the anima archetype, metaphysical discernible intellectual attribution predicable to the particular specific female, and the particular displacement then afterward the replacement predicable to her of the animus archetype, metaphysical discernible intellectual attribution, again of course predicable to the attractable female individual of mine. Therefore the love of mine, the appetite, passion, heat, and so forth of mine for the female body. This altogether, alone, always, and therefore it is a very significant and meaningful addition, or the particular specific attractable female predicable to the animus archetype, metaphysical, material cause, formal cause, intellectual formation, essentially and ultimately the body absolutely female, the soul or the value system such as of lordship idealism or even of lordship realism, predicable to her essentially enough, male as foremost primary enough, of which the particular specific attractable female can that of which emulate or imitate its particular specific adjectival categories naturally and identifiably within her own soul, or within her own metaphysical, intellectual, and so forth. Material cause, even formal cause, categorical predication. Therefore, the generality, and therefore the accidentality, and the mistakenness of which such generality of terms and phrases composed antecedently had unfortunately then led her own understanding of my own otherwise foremost true and foremost healthy, fierce, affectionate, passionate sexuality, thus downward too, though by now our own right, corrected, resolved understanding of this particular specific appetitive causation of my own, this now upward, January 25, 2013. Ultimately, such a terrible day it was to have been for me, to which to explain here clearly, of course, though as such essentially attributable to the music department, which I did head down into earlier this morning. Was hoping to record 2 lengthy improvisations, didn't get around to doing it this time, clearly refused to do so. Prior to this discarded intention, I'd wished to do a run-through of my program of the Wagner compositions. That is, of course, essentially the entirety of the compositions of his that were recorded and uploaded onto the account. For the particular specific date of mine, I had decided to try a rather different activity for the day, that is, rather instead of the playing of the Wagner music on one of the pianos far away, and essentially unrecognized from the hallway, the room with the chairs, and with the typical many people congregated within the room, I did instead play the Wagner compositions early this morning on a piano essentially adjacent to the hallway, the room, the chairs, and the people, ultimately on 2 different pianos due to initial irritability of the first piano, thus my refusal to further play on it, then therefore the second piano. Initially, the hallway and the room adjacent to the 2 practice rooms were not even occupied with other subjects. The music had begun quite well enough, and I had made it through to Lohengrin, to Elsa's dream and Lohengrin's arrival in particular. By this piece was the transfer from the first piano to the second piano. Then the irritability of mind has settled in. The pianos themselves, all of them essentially unfortunately so terrible of quality, that is of otherwise the final piano of the music departments, of the piano in the practice room furthest away from the hall room, the despair and the frustration, the absurdity of the necessity of the music department pianos, if ever I were again to play on one of the musical instruments. The second piano I had played on today, at first the piano itself was too high, the seat too low. I'd fixed the problem fortunately by adding another seat onto the seat itself. The pedal was irritating me over time so severely, this was positioned so unnaturally high, my foot simply could not adjust to the painful discomfort of it. The pedal would creak with each lift of it too. My word, then by the Meister Singer, my word, then by the De Meister Singer Quintet. I believe that this was the time when either classes were in between, or a group or 2 of people had since been congregated within the hallway room. The music of Wagner, such a shame. She and I both know this, of course. This is so truly religious music. This is so significant, meaningful, metaphysical music. Such a mistake this was to have played on one of the hall room adjacent pianos earlier this morning. The chattiness, the babbling, the sanguinary scoffing and mockery at any profound notation of phrase or melody and so forth. The Parsifal was the most disastrous attempt part of the program during earlier this morning. Indeed, I would not ever give in. I should have gone up and went and never to have returned. Clearly so by this division in time. On one side of the day's performance spectrum, the music itself, the execution of it, the technical precision of it, even so quite many of the metaphysical ideas predicated to the performance of the very compositions had went all quite very well. Actually, this earlier morning was truly one of the best performances of my program in regard to these above-mentioned properties. Though clearly so, the group or two of people in the hall room did sense the extreme irritability of mine. They had known quite clearly so, in addition, that ultimately this extreme irritability of mine, if not because of them, then such it was exacerbated tremendously so because of them. I do think that these particular people in the hall room were altogether ultimately fearful of me, honestly. I did not know whether the scoffing and the mockery was indeed intended consciously known of them, or that such was instead intended subconsciously unaware of them. I might actually still think the latter instance is to have been the case during the day's quite truly temperamental occasion, though ultimately never again will I use something like that in such a sacrilegious place, that is, to play and perform the piano, especially so the so truly religious and so significant, meaningful, metaphysical compositions of Wagner, ever at all so close to the parasites of the human sanguinary waste. I then ended up having left in such a terrible and despaired mood, not having ever gotten to the recording of the improvisations of the day. That itself, the intended improvisations, antecedently, was so very promising to me. January 29, 2013. She is correct. Indeed, my happier disposition has not left me now afterward the events of the earlier morning of yesterday. Now some smiling is found within me, more warmth and further confidence. It is early in the morning here right now. Even Condemned had come across me in the kitchen later in the afternoon yesterday and had greeted me in quite sufficient a friendly manner of his, that in itself had me feeling more cheerful afterward the occasion. I have been well rested too since earlier the afternoon of yesterday. I know that she is so busy at work, perfectly understandable, and this is always acceptable to me. She and I both see this and sense this at the time of her lesser hours of work. Even so, of her retirement is soon enough going to come. Eventually, though soon enough, is the very peacefulness, the relaxation, the restfulness, the imaginativeness, and so forth, found a part of it finally at last, and so well deservedly going then to have it acquired within her very own hands. Such rejoice in true cheerfulness I know this itself will then be for her and for her energy, and her always strong desire to pursue her very own interests, which transcend otherwise so entirely from the mass men, as she says of them, her very own artistic endeavours, the perpetual will and volition to learn and to study in her direction of knowledge and so forth, the attentiveness and the relaxation of her direction of beautiful classical music, of the symphonic ethereality, most especially here of the entirety of the Wagnerian gamuts, my joy to her, and my truly best wishes to her, that the future of her own life settlement and her own vocational restoration is soon enough to then have been found finally at last within her comprehension. In fact, I did not see my Kopecki Nair father this last Lord's Day, though simply because of the rain and the snow conditions of the town during the day itself, unfortunately. But thankfully he and his very kind girlfriend, Shannon, and I have since then rescheduled our meeting already. The meeting during this coming Lord's Day, Law's Day, during the afternoon, I believe it is to be. We are to then head out to one of the restaurants around here and to at last catch up and discuss everything concerning ourselves as of lately with each other in person. I shall write to her Frigg then afterward concerning the meeting. I tend to type on the keyboard later during the night when the Condemned is asleep. The auditory atmosphere during this particular specific time, of course, is clearly much more peaceful, and there are rarely irritable disturbances during this time. Therefore, I shall continue to write to her when when he is here at the place, typically when during later in the night. Of course, I look very forward to the Parsifal presentation of her page. This itself is going to be very interesting to experience. I shall write to her on her page about it certainly as well. I'm determined strongly to record 2 improvisations, perhaps during some time later this week, if not then during the next. Curse on them, the cretins, the grubs, the final cause of Kali Yuga. Canonized, but of no use to me. I shall indeed dedicate the next 2 improvisations of mine to her, Frigg. If not, then shall dedicate them to both each other ourselves, to our own kindness, to our own causation category, to our own principality, and to our own substantial formal cause of spatiality. With a sunny smile, a kiss, and a farewell cap doffing, until later, eternal and everlasting love, warm and kind admiration, more sunny and more cheerful strength to her. From the foremost brightness and brilliance of the Hyperborean generative originative of formalization, January 30, 2013. I've had a prayer film finished and uploaded onto the account from earlier yesterday. The final prayer, in fact, it is to have been. And alongside this, I've then put together a video of all 4 of the prayer films into one, thus the prayer complete. 1 minute short of 2 hours, the prayer film series is altogether to have been. This is peculiar. I do not believe that I'm truly finished with the task of these prayer films. The next prayer series, for one, should include the complete second act of Parsifal, essentially far darker and of much more madness, as well as of the scenery, the setting, as it should be a new setting, a new place. It may possibly be somewhere even higher altitude and even more desolation, a peak on a mountain from somewhere around here, perhaps somewhere from Big Bear. Then there might possibly be the Garden of Eden Wilderness. Then there might possibly be a 3rd prayer series as well, though this itself is for now so very far to come, truly mysterious to me. Of what this itself will be composed of for the time being. This takes time. I recollect this, of course. January 31, 2013. Just a brief check-in, this must be quick. Indeed, Kopecky, Nair, father, and I, and his girlfriend, too, are altogether going to be headed out to a restaurant within my town. Once they do arrive, which they should arrive by any minute now, in fact they are 21 minutes late as of right now, they might have got lost, though hopefully not. February 3, 2013. In regard to the meeting of mine with Kopecky, Nair, father, and his girlfriend, the meeting ultimately was in fact not very eventful. Nothing really significant had truly come about from it as its result. Primarily, they had both together arrived in his Nair girlfriend's car at my place, and we had greeted each other and warmed up again socially with each other. We had driven out to and had lunched at a restaurant, spoke during the ride as well as did most of our conversing during the lunch at the restaurant. Afterward, my Kopecky Nair father had arrived to contribute some of his money to my own grocery shopping. That is, we had then driven out to the local supermarkets, and I had shown him around the place, and we had purchased a couple dozen or so American dollars worth, a Helheim coin worth amount of groceries, and some couple cartons of blackberries were purchased along with some couple of cereals, both normally most rarity to purchase for me, though the blackberries afterward at my home were quite very good, truly good. I should most probably begin to purchase more of these, along with some of the blueberries and some other sorts of fruits far more commonly so from this point onward. The grapes I've been purchasing more commonly already, and plenty of bananas too, certainly, though of oranges and of apples, perhaps more commonly soon to come too. That afterward we had driven back to my place and had said our farewell to each other. This specific time at the meeting was quite emotional, understandably, for all the 3 of us, and my Kopecky Nair father and I had embraced each other during the very end, and his Nair girlfriend and I had then held each other's hands for a moment or two, and by this time I had needed to turn away and head back up inside the house, for my tears were struggling, and very likely noticeably to them, to have been held back from the two of them at this point in time. Throughout the meeting, it was ultimately quite very peculiar, and honestly, I do not know whatever either my Kopecki Nair father or his Nair girlfriend were thinking of me during the whole course of the time, or what their own thoughts concerning me had consisted of afterward during their drive back to their county location. Though my Kopecki Nair father and I have clearly our respectfulness and admiration of both each other, ever the more so that clearly he has respectfulness and admiration of myself as his so-called quote-unquote firstborn son, that each of our own understanding and identification with each other is altogether truly very strong and inveterate by this point in time, onward until the very end, clearly truly so, and his Nair girlfriend, considering of her during the meeting, she herself was rather quieter than normally she was to have been to me in the past. Again, this itself is ponderous to me forever darkness, though ultimately so far as this is to be sensed credible and truthful to me, I do affirm that she herself had then thought ultimately truly enough affirmative affectionateness and relativity to me during the meeting of mine with her as well as of yesterday. Truly, I do not know of their formal judgment of me, perhaps not until the very end of the life manifestation of mine. The particulars of the conversation during the meeting had most consisted of my own physical condition, most especially so of my own dwelling situation, the supposedly actual moving away of condemned within the next coming 1 or so months, as well as some of the conversation has centered on my Kopecki Nair father's own dwelling situation, most especially so concerning that of condemned, ultimately something such as that I'm not like your Kopecki Walker Nair mother, Odin, as he would have told me in our conversation during the meeting of ourselves from yesterday, and I do sense that truly he loves his children altogether far more strongly, soundly, credibly, truthfully so, than ever the more clearly so. The mother of my Kopecki Walker Nair siblings and of I otherwise would not identify with this as such. The truthfulness and so forth, the love, sympathy, mercy attributable to that of his own, most especially so, not in the universal affirmative sense of the sentiment that of which is ultimately predicable concerning the two Kopecki Walker Nair parents, so-called quote-unquote of mine, in relativity foremost of a soundly, credibly, and truthfully only to that of my Kopecki Nair father. A so very sad and pitiful knowledge of the mother of the Kopecki Walker Nair mother of mine, quote-unquote, so-called quote-unquote of mine, if she herself was ever forever predicable to me. Though again, I do not know ultimately whatever is going to happen or going to occur to me within the next 1 or so months to come. Though I do hope, wish, and pray for some kind of reward, whether this be a particular reward or if not, then universal reward. The former is to then be most likely so, though only then so if the next couple or so months intend to give to me a reward of some kind ultimately so. February 4, 2013. Indeed, I had went to the appointments of mine earlier this morning, and even so afterward, the day of mine had become suddenly kinder to me, somehow more merciful, more warmer to me. Even so, while at the grocery market there were legitimate smiles that were exchanged between complete strangers and I, this for the first time, since beyond the faculty of my remembrance of the specific societal activity. The day of today had become quite peculiar to me, with very optimism, hope, and legitimate reminder of the true actuality, or at least of the sufficient potentiality of the authentic redemption and salvation of me in the very end. Ultimately so, this is still to have been very conceivable and truthful. February 7, 2013. There is indeed a new video of mine that I have filmed earlier during the later evening. A peculiar film, very distinct and uncommon of its subject matter or its type, to have been filmed by me. I do recollect of 1 or 2 other films or parts of films of mine that I've done so similarly within the past, though this latest film, The Dethroned Emperor, Dethroned Emperor 2 film is the lengthiest one that I have done of them so far up until now. It is quite emotional for me to watch this one. Also, the term alpha male and some terms so forth a similar resound throughout this film. This film is some remembrance of mine, while at this later, deeper, far more matured state of my life, left apart for others to view of it. If ever I were to perish ultimately, and then others could therefore have a few or so minutes of me in my own efficient form, in this efficient form preserved as such. The music of the film is quite fitting enough a part of it. Also, successfully enough, I had tried to capture this efficient form of mine, some of the movements and activities very peculiar, quite definitive of my character and physique, as it has come to be rather so significantly at around this later, deeper, far more matured state of my life manifestation. I know that she would. I know that she should like this film of me, and I did affirm the best presentation of me during the film, just to have her know, that is, that how I most truly am perceived physically enough in actuality, as well as how I most truly am perceived metaphysically efficiently enough. February 8th, 2013. Some further news has come up very recently today concerning Condemned moving away. He and his mother have been accepted a property offer for Condemned down south, a couple towns from here, though this town is not in the mountains. That's to write this briefly. Ultimately, the new monthly rental agreement, if I were to remain at the Garden of Eden place, is actually quite lower than I had imagined it to be accepted to his mother, the landlord. That is, I then offered her a quite affordable amount to me for each and every month, and she had written back telling me that the specific monetary amount is in truth permissible, though the internet, the television, and the telephone bill altogether would fall under my own responsibility, but the utility billing would continue to be paid by her. Of course, were I to act and to live conservatively and wisely in regard to them, these utilities, and then I had calculated the average monetary expenditures of mine for each typical month, I had come to understand that ultimately the amounts of my monetary income would in fact not cover what new monetary expenditures of mine for each and every month would otherwise be, though these as such are so very close to being affordable by me. Right now, I've been really contemplating somehow to find the means to acquire at least, or at most, 100 Helheim coin for each and every month afterward the new monthly rental agreement, if only I were to then have been covered financially sufficiently enough. In fact, I may ask my Kopeki Nair father for this request of 100 Helheim coin, additional money for each and every month, though such, at least for the time being. This itself, his help of me concerning this, if this were to have been affirmed, would truly have proven him as transcendent from beyond most all entire praise and worthiness of measurement to me. This is, of course, a very selfish request to desire from him this additional coin, though truly I do not wish to move into the property to situate and to dwell again with Condemned, no matter that the property itself is somewhat of a nicer place than of even the Garden of Eden property. The myriad climate is practicable to the valley, to the summer heat, the Mediterranean environment. This is not at all identifiable to me. This would have been closer again to escondido, to darkness, as escondido, the term itself, is otherwise translated into English. The town was the dwelling location of mine, essentially from grade school up until my age of 19. Ultimately, the new Murieta property must be denied from the question. The Garden of Eden property must be remained affirmative, and the place itself is ultimately affordable enough to me, though only if an additional income amount of 100 Helheim coin for each and every month was through some means to have been obtained. This coin amount I must ultimately request of its obtainment from my Kopeki Nair father for the time being, and if this is permitted and granted from him to be so, then indeed, in truth, the Garden of Eden property is going to have then become and remained a part of my own living space and dwelling location indefinitely. Otherwise, I must then search elsewhere for another property. Of course, that this property itself is to have been a part of my own this next time, that this next living space will of course be located within a mountainous and pine forested climate of the Garden of Eden wilderness area, just as beforehand. February 9, 2013. come across this idea of mine in regard to how I would otherwise obtain the additional 100 Helheim coin for every month afterward condemned will have then been moved on. I shall speak to my Kopeki Nair father indeed, though instead of the quite selfish and demanding request to receive the amount of 100 Helheim coin per month from him, I will instead arrange with him to pack up the piano at his place. The piano is indeed my own. I have no worry or concern of him as to the capability of mine to receive the specific piano from his place. He himself had even suggested to then give it back to me already before, and he will drive up to my place afterward. The property is to have been given to myself, and the piano shall be at my place from that point in time onward. Then, in order to acquire the additional 100 Helheim coin per month, I shall indeed advertise for some piano lessons and teaching, and acquire probably at most one student or possibly two, and then give one or possibly two piano lessons at my place for each and every week, and charge the lessons at around 25 Helheim coin for every hour, and then 25 Helheim coin per week times 4. Then, therefore, 100 Helheim coin acquired for each and every month, and then this is that the additional 100 Helheim coin for each and every month is to have been obtained far more selflessly and morally as such obtained. I'm going to write to my Kopeki Nair father about everything concerning the news, concerning the initial plan of mine to request from him the additional coin, simply for thoroughness, and as well as write to him the arrangement for he and I to drive the piano up to my place. That is, of course, during after the time that condemned is to have been moved away. This is still to be probably at most a month or so to go. And to write to him, my Kopeki Nair father, about the piano teaching plan of mine. That is, just enough piano teaching in order to cover the ultimately necessary additional 100 Helheim coin per month that I will in truth otherwise need in order to cover the coming increased expenditures practicable to the time after condemned is to have been moved out. The piano lessons idea is a far greater and more realizable idea than the former begging request for my Kopeki Nair father. Teaching the piano at my place to a student or two should be the better and foremost nobler means to acquire the additional coin. The age of the student would probably be anywhere from adolescence to adulthood, not too young, not too basic or unknowledgeable of the instruments, though not too extremely advanced of it, though again a quite advanced student of mine would be the foremost ideal. By the time that the piano of mine is to have been reacquired and placed then at my property, I will have long since then returned to practicing a far wider survey of other classical composers myself. I have these plans in mind to print out plenty of sheet music books from most of the primary classical composers and their works, and to study them rigorously and in absolute or sufficient enough of silence, not again at a college, university or elsewhere, as I have indeed written of this plan of mine already before. But for now, I hope, wish, pray truly so that this particular specific plan of mine is ultimately going to work successfully and masterfully. I'm going to write to my Kopeki Nair father later tonight in regard to the entirety of the specific subject matter. The piano at my Kopeki Nair father's place should be permissible to use still, that is, the sound, the quality, and so forth of it should still be acceptable to the ears, and to then study from it. Perhaps the tuning of it is in order, though nothing further should trouble the practitioner of it. February 10, 2013. I did write to my Kopeki Nair father concerning the latest property news of the decision of mine to remain here at the Garden of Eden Place afterward, the initial and final plans of mine in order to safeguard and to protect the financial security of mine afterward. That is, of course, the ultimate plan of the piano at his place to have been arranged and moved up to my own place. Then the commencement of the piano instructions of one or two students in order to cover the coming increased monthly expenditures and to maintain the financial surplus of my own income. As of now, I'm still in wait of his message back to me, actually, though he tends to always write back to me with strong faithfulness and with the customary loyalty of his return. Therefore, it is expected of me to hear from him quite soon. February 12, 2013. The snow is always going to have been one of the most truly beautiful attributes of the nature of the material world and principle to me. February 12, 2013. In fact, this is a very good surprise to know, but today I did head down one more time to the college university, really, and to practice and record successfully. That both of the activities were so successful that very thankfully I was excessively nervous just prior to the drive down, and instead actually somewhat less nervous during the drive itself. I had begun this peculiar, though very self-redeeming practice during the drive down the mountain itself, by perceiving the other people and looking at them, their faces, actually, to people of oncoming traffic in particular during the drive. In this practice, I did this to many of the people. Almost immediately, the expression of mine, the look on my face and such, this had begun to change so much for the better, so very strongly too. I was not fearful of them, that is, of essentially any of the others. I was not ireful or hateful of every one else. Such a positive change this was at last, and that I had continued to do this up to the arrival into the entrance of mine into college university, even so as such during all the way into the very practice room itself that I had chosen to practice within. That is, this good and sharp, benevolent eye contact and facial expression even to the other persons that were situated there in the hallway room, practice room session of the music department. They did not even judge me negatively this time, not throughout the duration of the practice session itself either. The practice room itself was inevitably the room closest to the outside occasional bustle and commotion. Ultimately, it was not at all a negative practice session. The practice session itself had consisted of the Wagner program of mine. Throughout the practice session, I continued to experience rightly these authentic chills, legitimate tears as a part of the music. The persons outside of the practice room, as I had sensed probably very rightly so, were respectful and understanding of me and the music that I had played during the time. The theme of the music was essentially, how is the material cause to be subordinated legitimately to the efficient cause? That is, how father, mother, son, daughter, legitimately so, and that is, how not father, son, mother, daughter. The music itself, along with its as practical to the great many number of other religious and spiritual themes that of which right now I'm difficultly trying to remember what they were at the time, though such altogether was successful too, and indeed even the women that were occasionally out in the hallway room during the practice session today, again as I sensed it probably rightly so, were sufficiently enough respectful and understanding and essentially quiet, and not mock-worthy or rude and so forth, throughout the duration of the practice session. Then later, the time was in the later evening. In fact, the latest I had ever studied the piano while at the music department. I was there ultimately up to 10 o'clock in the evening. At last, I'd practiced improvisation and had warmed up with the particular subject matter on the piano for some moments at the time, and then had created ultimately one improvisation recording, and again at last, and this one improvisation recording from the experience of the day to day is to be of 20 minutes in length. The piece itself is going to be entitled Snow. The music itself is quite so very beautiful enough, though it was most importantly here successful. The day itself was so very successful to me. Truly, I do not fear the students of the music department anymore. In fact, while I was playing today during some of the late Wagner, I felt there almost very, very welcome and a friend of the students themselves. This was within the atmosphere, a sense very affirmatively of me. This had reminded me of the very old days of mine that I had then experienced with the other college music students while studying at Palomar College. This was so peculiar. The character of mine was loved by them then, and as it was sensed now, they knew of me. I myself was peculiar and distinct of character and physique and so forth, and the same was felt, at least metaphysically so, by the San Bernardino University music students while during the practice session and so forth from earlier the day to day. Even so, I felt as though some certain female was out there in the hallway room, was attracted to me, was listening to me play the music. So very affirmative and redeeming to me, such an experience as it was earlier today, and this could be affirmative and redeeming, very meaningful for me from this point in my time onward. Snow. February 14, 2013.